Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY. You can find my company, QSato, at qsatotokyo.com and on Instagram at QSato.
And my name is Jacob, and I am Food Fan on YouTube.
All right, it's been a while since we've done this, Jacob, but some rumblings have been happening in especially the Japanese fountain pen world. And, you know, not to beat around the bush, so let's just get into it. The elephant in the room are obviously the new 2026 price increases. So we had some news last year, at the end of last year, that kind of welcomed us into this year with various price increases across Japanese companies, Platinum, Pilot, and Sailor, especially, or to be specific. And Pilot and Platinum had come first, right? And they said they were going to increase their prices, not on everything, but in general, by around 40%.
Yeah.
And then we had a little bit of a freak out, I think, in the community until Sailor came in and said, well, hold my beer. I'm going to increase prices by 100%.
Yeah.
Which means double. So I'm curious to see what kind of reactions you saw and your thoughts on this, because I know you're doing a lot of YouTube content. You're doing obviously more than just fountain pens, but you also get a lot of people who aren't necessarily in the stationery community and who react to your videos, right? Especially talking about price. So I'm curious about what you've seen and what you think.
In our little fountain pen world, I think people are maybe less price sensitive than elsewhere. I mean, if I'm making a video about a $25 gel ink pen like a Zento or whatever, then half of the comment is going to be like, who in the right mind would pay $25 for a pen? That's outrageous, right? So yeah, in our little world where people are generally less price sensitive, but I think the commentary recently has been that, you know, these Japanese pens, these mid-range models are just becoming out of range for a lot of people. You have the Platinum 3776, you have Pilot Custom, and you have Sailor's Profit, AK 1911L, and Pro Gear. Because the deal with those pens has always been for the longest that you are paying for a relatively plain-looking, simple pen compared to the European counterparts. Like, you have just a cartridge converter, you don't have any fancy materials, you don't have any particularly elaborate design on the cap and barrel. There's no like fancy hand-poured acrylic with diamond cast or whatever. Nothing like that. At best, you get translucent plastic, right? Even with the limited editions. But what you do get, where all the money goes, is on a gold nib. Right, so it's kind of boring pen with a really great gold nib. Right, so now we're seeing that for all of the three fountain pen makers, that mid-range model is now very much a high-end. And all of these fountain pen makers are now trying to put something else there in that mid-range. So we have talked before about the Pilot Custom NS. We talked about Sailor's new steel nib version of the Profit series. Platinum has tried to do various things with that this Procyon, which is getting more expensive every day, and also that Biso, the new old model, they're trying to position as a mid-range model. But now the question is the value proposition still there? I mean, if you're looking at a custom NS, if you're looking at a steel nibbed Sailor Profit, and you compare that to what you get in a similar price range from Esterbrook or Leonardo or Penlux or Narwhal or Delta or what have you, is the value proposition still there? And I think that's the calculus people are doing, and they're wondering, does it still make sense to buy these models?
Yeah. So we got to remember also that these used to be considered entry model gold nib fountain pens too. And I just want to bring out some numbers here. The Custom 74, and I'm not sure why there are two SKUs here, but I believe one is for the music nib. But anyway, so the more expensive SKU went from 27,500 yen to 33,000 yen. And so for context, that used to be 5 years ago what the Custom 823 cost. The Custom 823 has gone from 49,500 yen to 55,000 yen. Now, I think if you look at comparable, let's say, European models, right, especially for the 823, I think it's now comparable. A Custom 823 versus, let's say, an Aurora, or let's say a Monte Grappa with a gold nib, right, with a filling system. And for 33,000 yen, which is around $200, I don't think such a gold nib comparison really exists from the major European brands. So, in my opinion, and we'll talk a little bit more about why they have to do this later, but it seems like there has now been more of a harmonization of prices across countries. I want to bring up Platinum's prices as well. But let's see. Problem with looking up Platinum is that you just get the actual metal prices.
Which, by the way, is a topic in and of itself. I guess we will get to that later.
Oh yes. And all of these companies have weird SKUs. It's hard to find. Let's see where it is.
But so while you bring up to those prices, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, and again going back to this comparison, is that you talk about Aurora 88 and maybe Pelicans, etc. One can make an argument that you get more of a pen when you buy one of those European brands, because again, you're getting not only in many cases a more elaborate filling system, you get a more interesting materials, barrel design, etc. I think I would say that the only Japanese pen maker that sometimes do something interesting with a barrel at this price range is Platinum, with its Fuji or whatever they call these special editions, where they do all kinds of interesting cutouts, right? But other than that, we look at very plain looking barrels. You usually get at most two colors, and that's it.
So, speaking of Platinum, then I've brought up Platinum's prices. The 3776 is going from 28,000 yen to 40,000 yen.
And we're talking about the base black and gold standard model, right?
I'm looking at the Château Bleu, so yes. Conversely, though, an Aurora in this market, right, the Aurora 88 black and silver is 105,000 yen. So the top of the standard quote-unquote boring models from Pilot is still around half the price of the Aurora. Don't forget, 55,000 yen is only around 300 and whatever dollars right now. So when we compare this to the pre-pandemic price, it's actually still the same in US dollar terms. And why I want to bring this up in US dollar terms is because, and we're going to get a little bit into why these price increases are the way they are right now. the reason why I want to bring up US dollar terms is because a lot of the price increases, in my opinion, is due to it's due to the Japanese fiscal policy as well as macroeconomic conditions that have been, present in the past 40 years.
You're going a long way back.
Well, I don't know if you listened to The Pen Addict last week, but Brad read an article about Pilot increasing their prices on their friction pen, and they said they haven't raised the price of the friction pen in 25 years, and it's the first time in 40 years that they raised the price of their bestseller, which really reflects, in my opinion, the mentality that Japan has been living under. And I think this explains a little bit of a shock of the consumer. Because, Jacob, how long have you been here?
So I first came to Japan in 2002 as an exchange student. And I remember back then, if you went to like a vending machine and bought like a soda, that was like 110 yen. And it's been 110 yen for almost as long as I can remember. It's only really from the...
Until 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. During the pandemic or shortly after the pandemic, prices started to change across the board.
Yeah, and what's, I think, quite interesting is that one of the reasons, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but one of the reasons is, and I think a major one, is that Japan, when it had its bubble, was an export country, right? It exported cars, exported electronics, all this stuff. So it was a net export country. But if you look at the numbers now, I believe Japan is actually a net import country who hasn't had domestic inflation for, like I said, the last 40 years. And therefore, and I've been in these meetings, right? I've been in these meetings where the executives are talking about this. They're afraid that if they raise prices, then local Japanese folks won't be able to buy their products. So they would rather sacrifice the margin and they like to think of this as a social service to their fellow Japanese folks. And essentially, they think if they don't raise the prices, they take a hit on their margins, it's going to be better because then their Japanese customers will be able to purchase the item. Now, this all sounds really nice and good, but the reality of the matter is, most of the plastic is, even if it's processed in Japan, so the way that plastics work is that you essentially get the plastic in the form of pellets, and then you, in PMMA, in at least for the pens that we're talking about, right? They then get essentially inserted into a what do you call it? Injection molding machine, and then the pellets are melted and then turned into whatever shape the pen is. So even if the pen is made here, and therefore you're paying all your labor and stuff in Japanese yen, where does the plastic come from? Who produces the plastic pellets? There's a lot that's produced in the United States. There's a lot that's produced in China. I'm not sure that there's a lot that's produced in Japan itself. And then there's a second question. If you buy or upgrade machinery, where does your machinery come from? Where does the steel come from? And so this creates a problem because Japanese wages haven't increased, real wages have not increased in the past 40 years, but the rest of the world has had inflation for the past 40 years. And when you're importing all the raw materials, then the companies themselves face an actual increase in prices, even if they're not passed on to the consumers. So in some meetings that I've been in, or in some products that I've helped develop, we were looking at gross margins of 30%, which, Jacob, you work in finance, that's not a healthy business margin.
Yeah, I think we talked also about that in the context of Sailor before, because you can see, obviously gross margin in the earnings report saying Sailor's gross margin. I can't remember the exact number, but it wasn't great, and so that obviously explains why they had to increase prices as the material costs have gone up.
But then, because obviously Japan doesn't live in an isolated vacuum, Japan was still exporting these end products, and the way you export and you price products, you price them based on an export model that you have, and the basis of the calculation is, of course, their domestic price. Now, the problem is, for the past 40 years, again, outside of Japan, you faced inflation. Inside of Japan, you haven't faced inflation, but you're exporting these items based on your Japan price, based on your own margin targets. And what happens is that while 40 years ago, the prices between, let's say, Japan and the rest of the world is still fairly uniform, and then 30 years ago, Japanese pens seemed to, be a pretty good deal. And then 20 years ago, they became a really good deal. And then 10 years ago, they became the entry-level gold nib pen, because the rest of the world were increasing their prices and Japan wasn't. And Mike commented on this in, again, last week's Pen Act episode. He was like, it's crazy to think that a company wouldn't increase their prices for 25 years on their product. That's, how do you run a business like that? And I think that's the right sentiment there.
Yeah, I mean, the prices were even baked into the model name, right? So Pilot 742 stands for 20,000 yen, right? 743, that's 30,000 yen. And that was the price for a long time, but we're left at now.
Well, I think the reticence to increase the prices over the last, X number of years really has come to bite Japanese companies overall in general in the ass, because back then, 10, 20 years ago, we also had a strong yen policy. So I believe when you came, the yen was probably like $1 to like 80 yen or something, right?
I was here during, the financial crisis, or the Lehman shock, as they called it here. I remember for a while there, the yen was, I think it was like 80 yen. So the yen was really, really strong there for a while. And so I remember buying some stuff from overseas because suddenly everything was very affordable. But of course, the Japanese economy was in shambles. The thing is, right now, you're talking about how this is a problem, the Japanese economy. But on the other hand, like, the Japanese economy is actually doing very well right now. The Nikkei is at record highs, and there are some very strong companies like Shinetsu, that is like one of those leading suppliers to TSMC, that are selling the sales are going up a lot. So it sort of depends on the nature of the business. It depends on to what extent they're exporting, right? And some companies are really benefiting from the weak yen.
But the Japanese stock market is doing very well. I don't think the Japanese economy is doing very well, because you have now we have inflation, but still no rise in real wages. The Japanese economy is GDP growth missed target in Q4, and we were 5 years ago, we were 3 years ago, the second largest economy in the world, and now this year we're projected to fall to 5th or 6th.
Also, many companies are reporting record profits, and those are the export-focused companies. But as you're saying, because there hasn't been any inflation for as long as people can remember, companies are understandably hesitant to adjust wages accordingly, right? So that's not part of the HR formula, right? So this is an adjustment, and as you're saying, that as a consequence of that, real wages are going down. So personal consumption, domestic consumption is very weak, and that, of course, is why we're seeing that the Japanese fountain pen makers, they're reporting weak domestic consumption.
I think back in the mid 2000s when the yen was at 80 yen to the dollar, yeah, exports really suffered, and I think the headline companies like Toyota or whatever, how do you make something in Japan when the yen is 80 yen to the dollar? You can't sell that abroad. But what they could do is they could, like you said, you on an individual basis, you bought a lot of stuff from overseas. So did the rest of these companies. So easy to buy gold, easy to buy, plastic, easy to buy steel, easy to buy whatever materials that you want. And then, you make them here, and then hopefully people buy them here. Well, Japan has a large population, right? And, back then we say the economy was in shambles, but it was still the second largest economy in the world at the time. And then, don't forget, most of that was actually internal. Was domestic consumption, and then there was also export by the headliner companies. But, back in the day, you couldn't just buy anything from Japan, right? Even the cell phones were not the same, frequency.
Right.
But now you're hit with a double whammy of both inflation going up at the same time as a weakening yen. So you have higher prices abroad, and you have to pay for those higher prices with a yen that's basically worth half of what it was in the mid-2000s. So I think while it's easier for the headliner companies to export now, most of the cost savings actually comes in labor costs. Compared to, let's say, manufacturing it in China or Mexico or Canada or whatever it is. So, kind of bring this back to fountain pens. I think a big issue here is Abe pursued, and we're in the extension of Abenomics, right? Sadaenomics is basically Abenomics 2.0. One of the core policies was to pursue a weak yen. And I think what weak yen meant was 120. I don't know if it meant 158. But, this is a continuation of economic policy. And I read this morning that Mikitani-san of Rakuten was saying that he wrote a letter to Takaichi Sanae saying that we are clearly going in the wrong direction as an economy. So, yeah, the point is you have inflation in the rest of the world, no inflation in Japan. Japanese companies refuse to increase real wages, but you still have to pay for the raw materials in dollars because everybody else is doing business in dollars.
Yeah.
And so when we look at that, and then we look at the weak yen policy, of course, everything in yen will, it has to double in price because the yen's value has halved. So the price increases, as strange as they may sound, kind of actually makes sense for me.
From a manufacturer's perspective, of course, this is what you have to do. We understand the factors involved. We understand why they have no choice. If they keep the prices, they would lose money on every unit sold. There's no question about that. There's no question why they have to do this. The question is instead now, there's a market segment that the Japanese pen makers aren't really serving yet, and that's what we're seeing, these foreign brands showing up in a way that we didn't see them before. Both in the magazines like Shumino Bungo Baku and actually in the retail stores, you see more of these. I mentioned Narwhal, Esterbrook, Penlock, etc., because they have more attractive offerings in this 20,000 to 30,000 yen range. So the question is, now that Sailor has increased the price on their gold nib, previously entry-level models, not so much entry-level anymore, what do they replace those models with in this 20,000 to 30,000 price range, or are they even keen on doing that?
Yeah, and I was able to talk to a retailer recently about this, and he basically said it's pretty much impossible to sell a an entry price gold nib now, right? Because as you said, it's no longer really that entry of a price. And if we analyze it from a domestic market perspective, don't forget it's not just pens that people have to buy. It's also milk, it's also eggs, it's also rice. And, well, why don't you tell us how that's been going for the Japanese market?
My normal shopping cart always consists of some eggs and a fountain pen. That's my daily save. You're right. I mean, prices have gone up for sure, and rice there's been a lot of discussion about that, and the nationalistic
Rice has been 5x.
Yeah, and the nationalistic parties have used that sort of as a talking point, and blaming the foreigners, etc. Right? The populists tend to do that, but yeah, prices have gone up. So the purchasing power is going down, and so the question is then, if for someone in Japan who they got the Preppy or Kakuno and they think they're into fountain pens, they want to get something nicer, what is available to them right now? And the Japanese pen makers don't really have that much that looks particularly attractive right now.
I think, kind of again, sorry to harp on this, but milk has doubled in price. So have eggs. I went to a sake brewery on Wednesday, and I was kind of discussing with the master brewer, and we were talking about the rice prices. And he said, Ishiba had this policy of doubling rice production, and he had Koizumi, who I think was actually probably a pretty good Minister of Agriculture. I don't know how well he is at defense, but as Minister of Agriculture, I think he actually was a pretty reassuring face. But now under Takaichi, he hasn't heard anything, and they were a brewer that did 100% rice fermentation. Now maybe they have to, because they can't get enough rice, they might have to sell stuff with 60%, rice or some other substitutes in order to make it past this next brewing year. And so, it is affecting all sorts of issues. And this is, I think, a lot of people, they don't want politics to be involved in their hobbies, but the fact is that politics are involved in their hobbies, right? And kind of then bring it back to fountain pens. What do we have now? We have, in my opinion, we still have some really strong contenders in the domestic market. I like the Pilot Lightive. As you know, it comes in several different colors with an excellent steel nib. But even the narwhals, even the Twisbees, they're 10,000 yen.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm saying is that I think there is this next level pen bracket that is, go from anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 yen. That where they have a lot of interesting options now from Taiwanese and also US, to some extent European pen makers. But what the Japanese pen makers offer in that range doesn't look particularly attractive to me, because again, what they have done is they've taken these plain looking pens and where the whole value proposition was the gold nib, and they've replaced the gold nib with a steel nib. So now you're left with a plain pen without a gold nib.
Yeah. I guess that's where we've seen like the Sailor Tuzu. I don't know how well that does. And I think Yeah, I think the Lightif again comes in the bright red. It's not the swirly acrylics. It's still definitely injection molded PMMA. But you're right. It's when it comes to variety, it doesn't seem to be as varied as some of these import brands. And then also among the young kids now, Chinese pens are very popular. So even Morisan from Wagner has really been promoting these Chinese pens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to be, the year of Chinese pens. Maybe we can talk about it that bit more in a bit. But what I would say is, for these Japanese pen makers, I'm not sure how much Pilot cares. We have talked so much before about how, the fountain pen business, that, it doesn't really, it's like a rounding error for them. And I could be wrong, but I suspect that the high-end models aren't as affected by these price increases. So your Namikis, your custom KOPs with, Urushi, your Nakayas. I think the people who buy those kind of pens aren't as price sensitive, and maybe they have a lot of foreign customers there. I think it's particularly these mid-range models, which makes me think that Sailor and possibly Platinum, Platinum, because they're private, we don't know much about what they're doing, they are more exposed here. It might be a good time to mention another thing, which is that if you're looking at Sailor's earnings, you can see that they are really pinning their hopes on one product they've been discussing for over a year now that's going to finally come out in February. Sailor doesn't only do fountain pens, but we mostly know them as a fountain pen maker. And when you go to the retail stores, you have to search a long time to find Sailor's ballpoints. They don't seem to be particularly popular. I'm sure they envy the ballpoint and gel ink business that, Uniball and Pilot and others have. So what we see now is that they are going to release a pen with erasable ink, and this has been this long research project by Plus. So Plus owns Sailor, as we know. Plus also owns Pentel. So those three companies have been working together on a new erasable ink formulation. In other words, a Pilot friction competitor. And that's going to come out now in February. And given how popular friction is, I'm sure they have very high hopes for this, and so maybe that would offset the decline in fountain pen sales.
I think you're right. I think it comes at a good time where the friction also has increased their prices. So strategically, this is a great time to go in. But then again, Sailor does have all this machinery that's set up to make fountain pens, right? So I have a question, which is, do they reduce their machine time on the fountain pens if they're not selling? Or do they just keep making these fountain pens?
So one thing I think we're going to see more of is, I think we're going to see Sailor move away from standard models. If you look at the most recent earnings report, they highlighted what they call PB, a private brand. They also call store exclusives. That is sort of segment that is doing well, while the standard models, I can't remember exactly the wording they used, but effectively the standard models with gold nibs didn't sell well. And one thing that some people have noticed along this recent price increase announcement is that some models were missing. And those models were ProGear Slim, ProGear Slim Mini, and Sailor Realo. And if you go to Sailor's website right now and search for those models, you see that all of them are marked as discontinued. I get the impression that Sailor is moving away from, the boring standard models and focusing on like limited runs, which is what they have been doing for a while, right? Because, Valio and Shikiori are basically like special edition Pro Gear Slims, right? And like Rencontro, whatever you call them, that new short one, is effectively a limited edition Pro Gear Slim Mini. And I suspect that Realo will live on, but only as store exclusives. I think that may be one change we're going to see, that they focus away from standard models, which they probably should have done long ago.
I mean, they're keeping the cylindrical and intelligent.
For now, yeah. But that's still not, yeah, I mean, it's sort of borderline because they have done a few versions of it, right? And at least it looks more exciting than a standard, black plastic pen with gold trim. So it's sort of borderline special edition.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about their gold content too?
Let's do it. Yeah, I mean, this is the Talk Inklings was right segment.
Yeah, we called it for years. We had been begging Sailor, just reduce your gold content and keep selling the pens, and now they have. I think 14K models are now available with 18 karat gold as well, and I think 21 is now reserved. I believe the Naginata models is still 21K. Would that be correct?
I'm not sure exactly what models will have 21K. I think there was one recently called like Pro Gear Anchor that was 21K. I may have misunderstood that, but yeah, I think they are reducing what models are available with 21K. Well, and 14 and 18K are now going to be, most of the standard. Or not standard, but most of the production models will have 14K and 18K. And we talked a long time before about how back in the 80s and in the 90s, they had large, like Pro Gear size 14K nibs and 18K nibs. The 14K nibs went away altogether. The 18K nibs were limited to some, like, I think Cross and Montegrappa and others had Sailor-made 18K nibs. But then they came back. I think we covered that 1 year ago or 2 years ago. We started seeing some store exclusive with 18K, and now 14K large nibs are back as well.
Yes, and this is kind of interesting because, we obviously talked a lot about economic policy, yen weakening and all that, but we didn't really talk about gold prices increasing, which they are. I just paid around double for gold as compared to what I paid in 2024. So that's fun. And also, of course, gold prices are denominated in dollars. So Japan is getting a double whammy. So they would have paid 4x the price of what they would have paid, a couple of years ago. And I wonder, well, several things. One, will we maybe see even lower gold content? Because 14 karat is pretty much the standard accepted as what quote-unquote gold is, right? But that's still 58.5, whereas 12K would be 50%. And because we've seen 12K nibs before, we've even seen 10K nibs before, which they call it gold, but it's actually less than half as gold. I'm wondering, as in the 80s, we had this competition, I suppose, between the big three Japanese brands, seeing who can get up to the highest gold content in nibs, and with Sailor even coming out with a 24 karat gold nib. Will we see now a lower gold content nib, maybe to fill in that that mid-range spot that you were talking about, maybe 20,000 yen. Now that Sailor has had that precedent.
That's a very interesting question, because this goes back to this fundamental question about why do people buy gold nibs to begin with, right? And I think that there's some nuance lost in this discussion elsewhere. I would say, we talked about that a little bit over chat, but I would say that there's at least three factors here. One is you want that bounce with snapback. You can have bounce without snapback with like titanium, like the grade 2 titanium. But if you want, that writing experience, then probably has to be 14K. Then there is the prestige factor, right? You are buying a fancy pen because you want to look impressive in the boardroom, right? That's the thing, right? And titanium or maybe low gold content won't cut it here. And then so the third one, which is probably related but not quite the same, is the traditionalists, the same people who believe that the feed has to be ebonite, the filling system has to be inkidome, it's got to have like a ball clip, etc. Right? There's an expectation that the fountain pen looks certain way. So depending on why you're buying a gold nib, I think you may or may not be open to lower gold content.
I think also, what's interesting is that the marketing materials claim that Sailor's marketing material claims that their 21 karat gold nibs are softer.
Which they're not.
Which is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. In fact, I think in order to get a higher gold content nib to perform and not deform, because gold is a soft material, right? More work hardening has to be done compared to a lower gold content nib, such as 14 karat one. It's my opinion that 14 karat gold is pretty much the sweet spot of gold nibs. But who's to say that a 12 karat gold nib can't have the same performance? Where I'm coming from then is the lifespan of this nib. And, when we started this podcast, we were all about the Yahoo auctions and the Mercaris. And how many times did we see some rusty nibs, right? Some just absolutely disgusting things. And if it's a steel nib,
then the nib is done for, yeah. But the gold nib is like indestructible. The worst thing that's going to happen is that so much of the tipping has worn off that it may affect the writing experience. But yeah, the gold itself, the rest of the nib is going to be fine. You just give it a wash and they're ready to go.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't have any cracks, you pull it out, you polish it, you put it back in, you put in another pen, right? So, I think when we think about the items that we buy, and our philosophy at Cusado, not to promote ourselves too much, but we want to make future antiques, right? We want somebody to be able to find this 100 years later and be like, wow, this is a cool thing, like, let's keep using it. I'm not convinced that a steel nib can perform that function, in part also because steel nibs just haven't been around as a standard for that long. Like, we had steel nibs, obviously, from 100 years ago, but they were not using the same types of steel, right? It was more likely to be carbon steel than the stainless steel, the modern stainless steel that we have. So, how well does a modern stainless steel nib fare against time is still, I think, up for debate. And we won't know this in our lifetimes, obviously, because, hopefully we'll be dead.
But I think what I see that you're doing, and I think what is the smart thing to do here is to go higher end, right? I see with your Urushi pens, etc. Right? I think that's the way to go because I think that segment is not as price sensitive, and I think it still makes sense with gold. But hypothetically, if you were to try to do, I'm not sure if you're interested in doing that, but theoretically, if you wanted to do something that competes with the likes of Esterbrook and Narwhal, how would you think about nib material?
Maybe this is a Tokyo Inklings exclusive, but we are going to come out with a steel nib pen within this year. I already have the prototype on my desk. It looks very good. It is going to be an inkidome, and it's going to have a fun little gimmick to it.
This episode is sponsored by Cusado.
So on that end, yes, we are doing something. We are also actively pursuing alternative materials because, as I said, the gold has doubled in price. Our pens have not doubled in price. And part of that is, built-in buffers. But if you ask me to estimate the trajectory of gold, I think gold is in general just super, super, generally speaking, is impacted by two things. The first thing it's impacted by is how well the U.S. bond markets are doing, I believe. And then the second thing that impacts it is war. The reason why the U.S. bond markets impact the price of gold is because the U.S. is the world reserve currency. And if the world reserve currency is in trouble, then people like to buy precious metals to hedge.
Just to add to that, I mean, it can be that you don't believe in the stability of the U.S. economy. It can be also just for geopolitical reasons, right? You want to reduce your exposure. So this is what we have seen, that central banks have bought gold instead of U.S. treasuries. So that's what we call the de-dollarization. So that is definitely a big factor here.
The second is war, because when you wage wars are very costly, and you have to stock up on gold. And there's actually now a third thing, which is impacting gold prices quite a lot, which I don't think people are understanding, and that's actually AI, because of the trillions and trillions of dollars that's going into this AI industry. I don't know if a lot of consumers realize, but most microchips are made with gold components in them. And so because we're making so many chips, it demands a lot of gold.
You're right, that's actually true. But the thing is, that is true with many other materials as well. So for example, like silver has dual purpose of being both like safe haven, and it's also used like for solar panels, etc. Because of course, energy is a big factor when it comes to this AI data center build up. Copper has gone up a lot in price because the power, you need copper to build out the power grid. Aluminum prices have gone up a lot because aluminum smelters are incredibly energy intensive, and the cost of energy is going up because of, again, I'm being a parrot here, but AI data center build out. So almost everywhere you look, all these materials are going up for this reason.
Yep. And silver has gone up 3x in price over the last year.
Yeah.
But gold in particular has the prestige of being the alternative to the dollar standard, right?
Yeah.
So if you were to ask me the trajectory of gold, I would say invest in gold. This is not financial advice, but investing in gold sure looks really good right now. Even though some people would say we're at a peak, but we've been at a peak for 4 or 5 years already. And I foresee more geopolitical conflicts happening in the next 5 years. So I don't think gold is coming down. Yes, that means our pens will get more expensive, perhaps even higher than inflation. And here's where I disagree with the pen addicts' take.
Here we go.
They talked about, okay, well, we have to stop buying gold nib fountain pens. It's making us think twice. They're not as good value, and steel nibs can be just as good as gold nibs. I fundamentally disagree with that take. I think steel nibs, while you can like them more, it doesn't mean that they're the same things. Because as you said earlier, gold has all these different properties that when you write with it feels different. So I don't think they should even be considered in the same category. What the pen addict said is, well, you shop your own collection, and that they're more interested now in like the stickers and the washi tapes, and the lower end items is where they find things to be more exciting. I have several rebuttals to this. Number one is that a lot of these sticker items, yes, they are really attractive for their price, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't buy them, but unfortunately, a lot of these folks will never ever be able to be retailed in a store. Why that is the case is because a lot of these people are independent and individual illustrators, and when they sell their products, most of these folks are not going to be able to print at a quantity where you can get any favorable pricing, and even if you were, they still don't have the margins that they would need to have in order for them to sell through a retail store, because the retail store is going to want 50% of the sale price as margin, which means that, and Brad knows this is why spoke pens are no longer retailed at retail stores, but it means that, if these stickers were to be retailed at a retail store, you'd be seeing a tripling in price from those items too. And then if the answer is, well, then we should just buy directly from the creators, which, yes, I think that's good as well. But it calls into question then what role does the retailer have to play? And is the retailer something that we should actively support? And I believe, my personal opinion, as a brand, as a company that makes products, I think that we should support our retail networks, because those are the people that are able to form local communities, and they're a key part in the ecosystem where people can come and discover and essentially build not just an ecosystem around your product, but the entire industry. I think retailers really lift up and are the backbone of the industry. And so I think I don't think this is what Brad is saying. I don't think Brad is saying that we shouldn't support retailers. But I think the consequence of, okay, let's just not buy, these fountain pens at these prices, means that the retailers are going to suffer and, potentially drive even more brick and mortar stores out of business. Conversely, my opinion is that while things are tighter, right, it's more important now more than ever to think about what types of items we want to buy. And even if it's more expensive for a single item, do we want to buy one gold nib fountain pen this year? Or do we want to buy 10 steel nib fountain pens? Is quantity really more? Is it what's going to make you happy? So I don't think the lesson here is, okay, let's pivot away from gold nib fountain pens. I think the lesson here is to be more mindful about and to be more aware of what you actually want. And if that's a steel nib pen, that's a steel nib pen, right? If that's a gold nib pen, that's a gold nib pen. But maybe strategize a bit more instead of kind of feeding into, well, I want to buy something now, so I'm going to buy what I can afford, versus I want to buy this specific particular thing, so I'm going to save up and buy that. Was that too spicy?
No, I think that's fine, but I do think, obviously you're both a consumer and you are a manufacturer, right? So I see partially you wearing the Crusader hat here, because I have a slightly different perspective. You can talk what you should be doing, and I'm all for, supporting your local retailer if they organize events, bring people together and so on. But I think what we are going to see is disruption of this model. So we have talked before about, these Chinese pens that they have very attractive prices, but the problem is the lack of retail presence. You can't just go into your Itoyo or whatever and buy them. But what I think we're going to see increasingly is that you don't need to go to retailer to buy them. So what you're already starting to see is these brands like Asvin. They're working with various influencers, that they're sending free pens left and right, and influencers do kind of promo type videos, and then they have affiliate links, which is the first step, but there's still not that easy to buy them that way. So I think the missing link, and to close this loop, what is going to happen is more use of the likes of TikTok Shop. I'm not sure how much you've seen TikTok Shop, but there are these other Chinese brands like home tool brands like Fantic and Hoto that are really good at this TikTok-based, affiliate type sales, where they have these armies of influencers, like tens of thousands of influencers, and they promote the product, and they have links right there in the video, right? It's like an overlay to the video. You tap that link, and you can buy the product. I think we're gonna see more of that for stationery and fountain pens. We have started to see that. There's one Chinese brand called Ritek, I think, that is starting to do that. You see some influencers on TikTok promoting Ritek products and getting people to buy them. I think we're going to see more of these, especially the Chinese brands, go this influencer affiliate route, and I think we're going to see the Chinese pens or any pen brands that are willing to take this route earning market share from the traditional ones that go via the brick and mortar retailer route. What do you think about that? Just to qualify that by saying, I'm not talking about the high end pen. I don't think you're gonna go on TikTok and buy like an Urushi lacquered pen with a stacked nib. I'm talking about these $50 to $100 Asvin type pen.
I have insider information that this is going to change really soon because China is going to start requiring there's going to be some tax changes essentially, and what this means is that the prices will increase by around 10-20% on the Chinese pens.
I don't think that would break this model though. I mean that's still very much fine. Again, if you compare to the cost associated with getting something on the store shelves,
it's a big deal for the inside China market. So I've been told that a bunch of folks are really worried about this. The brand owners, I mean. Regarding the TikTok stuff, yeah, I think it comes back down to how much do we want to value the retailer. And again, I think for these Chinese brands, Asvine and whatever, to be in a retail shop, they'd have to at least double or 3x their prices. So the only way you're getting those is by going onto TikTok and buying this. In the short term, I think it works. Yeah.
Can you just add one more thing here? These are the kind of products that, as a seller, your approach to after service would just be either you do a full refund or you send a replacement, right? I don't think we're talking about products that are so expensive that you need a way to get customers to send them back, repairs, etc. Because then that breaks down. Then the retailer model makes more sense. You go to your local retailer and then take a look at the pen, then send it back to the manufacturer, right? But if it's $50, they can just send you a new one.
Yes, but then you're in a position where you don't know who you're dealing with. This is some random TikTok shop.
But it's only random if you don't know, if you don't trust the influencer. And that's why these brands are so keen on reaching out to influencers that have an audience, right? But when you're buying the pen from that TikTok shop, you don't really care who the seller is. You care who is promoting that pen, and if that is an influencer that you, for one reason or another, trust, if that's the right word, then you might be keen on buying it. And that's the whole value proposition here, that the seller doesn't need to be trusted, the influencer is trusted.
I think this is a model that probably works for the short term and the lower end, like really sub $50.
Yeah.
I think in the long term, this business model will die. One, because it's dependent on a platform. And platforms come and go. And then number two, I think it's not it's really this buy and go kind of model, which again, I think it works for sub 50.
Yeah.
I think above 50, you're going to need somebody to explain the product to you. And I'm not convinced that an influencer can do this within a, 30 second to a minute type of thing. Even in the entry-level golden pens of, yesteryear, when the 74 was, 10,000 yen, you still wanted to go in and test out the pen, right? So I think it's interesting as a concept. I think when it's executed, obviously it's a hot thing now, especially in Southeast Asia as well, where most successful companies are selling through TikTok Shop. But when I look at what people want, I mean, I don't want to get too political on this podcast, but if you read Karl Marx, he actually describes this kind of phenomenon. And I'm just not convinced that this is what people want in the human condition, right?
You're going deep now.
No, I think the reason why communities like the Pen Addict are successful is because they talk to other people, right? I think the reason why pen shows are popular is because you get to meet other people. You get to see other things that you might not have been able to see. And that requires a place.
I think, your influencer channel is that place, or can be that place. And again, I'm pointing to these brands in other areas like Hoto and Fantic that have done a fantastic job like sourcing these free products to influencers, and the influencers come up with all kinds of creative ideas how to use these products, and they get like thousands of comments, and that becomes like a little kind of fake, but sort of parasocial fake little community there.
Yeah, but see, I don't think it's possible to recreate it, because in part that's why fountain pens are having a resurgence, right? The fountain pens are popular with these like tech workers who have nothing to do, in their jobs with writing, but because so much more of our other parts of our lives are online now, I think people yearn for that disconnect. And so, I don't think so.
But my question to that is, how much time do they actually spend, journaling at a cafe, disconnected, virtual? How much time do they spend talking about their pens on Reddit, on Slack, and Twitch, and what have you?
Right, and that's a really personal question, and obviously that depends from person to person. But that's something we have to ask ourselves, what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be perpetually online? Maybe the answer is yes, right? Maybe I'm an idiot and people just want to go online. But if you look at younger people here today, like these high school kids that are buying the 30,000 yen pencils, why are they doing that? Yes, they show it off online. Yes, they talk about it on Reddit. But then they form their own little communities. They want to show off to their friends. And, yeah, there's always going to be a side of consumerism. It's about hitting the endorphins. It's about clicking that buy button. In Japanese, there's even a word for it, right? Pochiru. So it's like, yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to exist. But as we move through this generation, I think consumers will have to decide. They'll have to decide whether they want to, hit the dopamine and buy from the TikTok shop, or take it slower. And I'm not here to judge that, right? I don't. I'm just a dude, right? Like I can't say one is better than the other, but I know for me what I want, and it's really just up to the consumer to think, well, what do they want? And yeah, I think you're right. Most people probably won't really think about it, but I think if we want to be conscientious consumers, right, this is something that we have to contend with, and we have to think about that.
We have to check back in a year and see if anything has happened. My suspicion is we're going to see more of this, direct-to-consumer influencer marketing. And the flip side of that is I have a feeling that this year we're going to see some well-known either pen maker or retailer or even both go out of business if they can't adjust to the changes in the market.
I think it will be very interesting if we're able to speak to some retailers maybe half a year from now and then maybe a year from now to see how these changes have impacted them. I think, that fake quote from Mark Twain, the reports of my death have been grossly over-exaggerated. The reports of these price increases have been overly exaggerated because, like I said earlier, if you look at Pilot, right? Yes, the yen price has indeed increased. If you look at it from not even dollar, right? Like if you're looking at it from any other currency, it's actually pretty much still comparable. And Japan for far too long has underpriced their items. Trump, for whatever else he says, he's kind of crazy, but he's saying that other countries have deliberately engaged in market manipulation, and this is actually an example of this. The Japanese pens have been chronically underpriced and undercutting the market for years and years and years and years now. And so I think this price increase is actually healthy for the fountain pen industry. I think we need to wrap our heads around it and kind of get used to the new prices. And I'll also say this. You are actually getting a better value if you buy a gold nib pen. If you buy a steel nib pen, it's much more likely that the price to manufacturing margin is way higher than a gold nib pen.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can only buy what you can afford, but the value proposition of gold nib pen, even at today's prices, in my opinion, it's not even an opinion, I see the numbers, right, is still much higher than that of a steel nib pen.
Sure, but the cost has still gone up, and I think the days of people collecting pro gears in every color of the rainbow because they want to have a collection, I think those days may be over. So
those days are over.
We have to check back in a year and see how our predictions have panned out.
I agree. Those days are over. The days of buying a couple pens a month, they're gone, out the window. We have to be more conscious of what we're buying.
Yeah. Or just splurge on TikTok shop. We'll see.
or go and buy $50 pens from TikTok Shop.
Exactly.
All right, and do we have anything else on this matter? I think we've kind of beat this topic to death by this point.
No, I think this is long enough. We can save it for the next podcast, which may be a month or will be years. We'll have to see.
Yeah, all right. See everybody. See you all next year. All right. Thanks, Jacob, and thank you, of course, to all of our audience. And this was Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY. You can find our brand at qsadotokyo.com, or you can find us on Instagram at qsado.
And my name is Jacob, and I am Food Fan on YouTube.
All right, we'll see everybody next time, be it in a few months or in a year. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.